Well, in the recent past, I don't remember any academician, scholar, intellectual, having so many tributes written from students, from other scholars, from various fields, and really very moving and academic ones. I also wrote something about him, what he meant to me, and I do not want to repeat that here. I want to instead dwell on a way of thinking that Sumit gave us. Let me begin with something small. Between 1988 and 1990, Sumit supervised my MPhil on women in Premchand's stories. I went to him troubled. Premchand was the great progressive, yet story after story seemed to close on familiar conservative notes: the devoted mother, the chaste and dutiful wife. Sumit quietly redirected the question. He suggested that I look not simply at how a story ends, but at the tensions running through it, the plot, the tone, the wider context that the ending cannot fully absorb. A narrative conclusion is not necessarily the same as authorial intention, nor is there a straight line between intention and what readers make of a text. A few comments turned the thesis on the axis. That was Sumit as a supervisor. Never doctrinaire, but offering a way of re-entering a text you thought you already understood. Some years later, grappling with the confident sweep of Saidian discourse, I returned to Sumit's Orientalism Revisited. He showed how colonial authority did not merely impose itself upon Indian society. It often accommodated and reinforced existing patriarchies. A crack appeared in a powerful theoretical edifice, revealing a messier history between colonizer and colonized. Later, working on Brahmacharya, I returned to Kalyug, Chakri and Bhakti. That seems to be really a favorite of so many. Sumit's reconstruction of a new, underpaid, status-anxious clerical class, haunted by epidemics, rising prices, and a supposed lost golden age, along with fears of waning manliness, assertive lower castes, and disorderly women. It helped me see why semen preservation and disciplined celibacy could acquire such urgency in the service of an ailing nation, and how they were tied to larger histories of masculinity, caste, gender, work, and body. More recently, writing Hindi Hindu histories and caught between theoretical celebrations and dismissals of the vernacular, I turned to modern times. Again, Sumit refused both enhancement and enchantment and denunciation, recovering the unruly worlds of vernacular print, patronized by the colonial state, sometimes censored by it, often simply beyond its reach. 3 encounters, 3 moments, when Sumit's writing did what his supervision had done years earlier, made me see complexities I had perhaps smoothed away too quickly. People remember his books, of course, but again and again they returned to the classroom, whose walls really seemed rather more porous than the university timetable allowed. Those of us who studied from him remember the almost poetic rhythm of his lectures, his extraordinary range, and his ability to make certainty give way to another question. We remember his work on nationalism, Swadeshi, popular movements in colonial India. But as my friends and colleagues Shahana and Aparna have written, he could move through early modern Europe with the same intellectual excitement. Witchcraft, woodcuts, and popular religion, Carlo Ginzburg, Natalie Zimmern Davis, Peter Burke. Political history opened into social history, national movement into local worlds. Leaders appeared alongside peasants, workers, and Adivasis. Caste and gender moved from the margins into the making of history itself. Literature, rumor, and popular belief enlarged the archive. But breadth for Sumit was never accumulation, it was connection. It is tempting at a moment like this to speak of Sumit in the vocabulary of monuments, a towering historian, a foundational figure. All of that is, of course, true. But a monument is fixed. Sumit's intellectual world never was. When modern India had already shaped a generation, he did not simply revise it 30 years later. He set it aside and wrote Modern Times because historiography had changed. New archives had emerged and his own understanding had shifted. Intellectual fidelity for Sumit was fidelity to history. Evidence could interrupt you, correct you, occasionally even embarrass you. Theory mattered, but he wore it lightly. It illuminated the archive. It did not substitute for it. He carried the same quiet conviction into his public life and politics, on Duta picket lines, beside striking workers, and in his unhesitating writing against communal violence at moments when silence would have been safer and easier. For Sumit, scholarship and citizenship were never separate rooms. And yet, there was nothing declamatory about him. Slight inbuilt, shy, soft-spoken, with those twinkling eyes and that wonderfully dry sense of humor. He could almost disappear into a room. He could guide without colonizing, correct without crushing. His students traveled in different places, universities, writing, journalism, public service. But something of Sumit's classroom traveled with them. We said our farewells to him on Independence Day. There was something resonant in that. A scholar who had spent his life asking what freedom actually meant. Not freedom declared from a rampart, but freedom argued over, appropriated, contested, and only ever partially realized. But there is another legacy, much harder to measure because it survives in habits of mind. The finest teacher remains with us in intimate ways, becoming part of one's intellectual conversation. And that conversation does not end simply because the person is no longer there. The mind understands, the heart is rather less disciplined. I think, for instance, what Sumit would have made of the recent Gen Z protests. Their almost carnivalesque air, the world turned upside down, authority mocked rather than feared, memes turned into political messages. I can see him standing slightly to one side, watching, immensely curious, wanting someone to translate for him every Hindi slogan, the cheekier the better. He would have enjoyed the wit, the refusal of deference, and the laughter. And then, with that familiar half smile, he would have asked the question none of us had thought to ask. More than 40 years after I first sat in Sumit's classroom, there is still one more question I want to take to him. One more conversation I wish I could have. Sumit has stopped speaking, but he has not stopped teaching. And I like to think that somewhere in that inner classroom, where our finest teachers continue to live, he is still standing slightly to one side, watching, smiling, and waiting for us to ask the next question.